First, we have Wendy Smith. Wendy Smith is the co-founder of Washington County Anti-Trafficking Advocates, which is a not-for-profit that works to prevent sexual exploitation within our communities through education about issues including trends, grooming techniques, and red flags. WCATA also offers advocacy and resources to victims, survivors, and their families. And I would also like to introduce Deacon Steve Shudfelsky. I might have murdered your last name, I'm sorry. Oh, awesome. Deacon Steve is the executive director of Franciscan Peacemakers in Milwaukee, an organization that serves women who've been sexually exploited, trafficked, struggling with homelessness or addictions. Under his leadership, the original street ministry outreach and advocacy has expanded to include social enterprise, resident-based trauma care facility, hospitality center, and a retail gift shop. I want to thank them both for being here today, and I also want to let you know that our next presentation is February 4th, and our presenter will be Justin Bangart. He is a Catholic family and marriage therapist, and he will be offering a presentation on wholeness, healing, and community in Christ. So without further ado, Wendy and Deacon Steve, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Grace Marie. Thank you, everybody, for staying. It's a nice crowd. Appreciate that. It's not a very exciting, or not exciting, but happy topic on a Sunday morning, but it's an important one. So we're so glad you're all here. This is such a large topic, and anyone who knows me knows that I like to talk a lot about this, but I only have, so I only have so much time. When I'm by myself, I have a broader time frame, but I got to give it up to Deacon Steve here, so he's the main focus. But so I'm going to kind of try to narrow it down, let you know what we want you to know through this presentation. We want you to leave knowing something very important, knowing a few things, not just leaving and letting it go. So I'm gonna give you kind of a brief overview, and then Deacon Steve's gonna dive deeper in. One thing that I'm gonna ask or explain is what is the definition of human trafficking? That definition. So talking about human trafficking, it's complicated. If somebody asks me, who talks about this all the time, it's not a one-word answer. It's not a one-sentence answer. Now, there is an official definition, which I'm going to read to you. We'll talk about this afterwards. Oh, and one of my jobs was to hand out these flyers that I have here, so you all had one in your hands. So when Deacon Steve is talking, I'll get them out to you, or Deacon Steve's going to do it. Yeah, that top one. That's the main one. So the actual definition, what is human trafficking? It involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion in exchange for labor, services, or a commercial sex act, causing someone under the age of 18 to engage in commercial sex act, regardless of using force, fraud, or coercion. I didn't grab my glasses. Regardless of use. Okay, so causing someone under the age of 18 to engage in a commercial sex act, regardless of use of force, fraud, or coercion, is human trafficking under the U.S. law. Traffickers use various forms of force, fraud, and coercion to control and exploit victims. These forms include imposing debt, fraudulent employment opportunities, false promises of love or a better life, psychological coercion and violence or threats of violence. The crime of human trafficking hinges on the exploitation of another person. People often falsely believe that human trafficking implies victims must be moved from one place to another to qualify as a victim. Human trafficking does not require transportation to be considered a crime. It is a crime that can be committed against an individual who has never left his or her hometown, and might I add, not even left their own house or bedroom now with the age of social media. So this is an important definition. However, does anybody here feel they're clearly understanding what human trafficking is now that they heard that definition? Not really, right? It really is not all that helpful. It's important for law for legal reasons, but it's hard for us to get a grasp. That's why stories are so important, personal stories. But that's hard to get from survivors because it's very triggering and it's very difficult to share those stories. It re-traumatizes them. So they depend on people like myself and others like Deacon Steve to share those stories perhaps and hopefully do it in a respectful, integral way. So some of the things we want you to know today, yes, it is happening here. It is happening here in our communities. Why are you not hearing about it then, right? Why do we know so little about this? What does it look like? These are the things we want you to know, and how can you help? Because when you get done hearing all about this, you're going to want to know, how can I help? How can I make a difference? So let's talk about the barriers involved with not quite understanding or identifying human trafficking. Why don't we know? Why don't we hear these stories? Why are there so many victims of this crime and so little reported, so little convicted offenders? Well, there's some things. It's underreported, right? This is any sexual crime of any sort is grossly underreported due to shame, fear. There's all sorts of personal reasons a person, perhaps they just don't have the strength to follow through with all the legal elements involved with it and all of the other ramifications that come along with opening the can of worms once you report. All right, so it's very underreported. Another reason, lack of education about what signs are, what the indicators are. So we're missing it. This is something that's happening right under our noses. We know this happening in plain sight is a term that is used in this arena of human trafficking. It's happening right under our noses, whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, which are the two the ones that happen most in our communities. So we're missing signs. We're not seeing what it looks like. And then there's the myths and misconceptions, which I personally have done full 2-hour presentations just on this topic multiple times. The myths and misconceptions of human trafficking are making you look over there when the real victim is over here. All right, you're looking for the white van with no windows following you through the parking lot. Hang on to your kids tight in Target. The traffickers might grab them and run. The girls driving down the highway and somebody's following them off the ramps. Don't stop, keep going, the traffickers are going to get you. All right, maybe some of you saw Sound of Freedom. All right, yeah, great movie, and it was very, very powerful movie, very powerful, well done. Us in this world of educating about this topic, we're really happy about having that movie out because it really gave us a lot of opportunities to have more conversations about the topic. But do you remember the one scene in towards the beginning where kids were just being snatched off the streets? All right, I cringed, and I think everybody else in this arena cringed because in our communities, that's not what it looks like. Like, there's a number from the professionals, not from Wendy, that say less than 1% of victims of human trafficking, of sex trafficking, have been brought into that life due to stranger abduction. Less than 1% in our country. It's just not how it happens typically. Now, there are abductions of kids and all of those things, but typically that's not a trafficking situation. So we're looking in the wrong direction. So I think one of the things, I think that's one of the most important, for me, one of the things that I hear from people a lot in having conversations is the border, politics. These are the things I hear a lot in conversations with people who don't really know. And yes, it's happening at the borders, and yes, that's an important element. But what we're talking about is what we can do and what we're missing here in our communities, right? Political agendas also, just completely derailing the possibility of anybody finding real victims here in our communities. If you're going to go down the rabbit hole of 100,000 kids on some underground tunnel being tortured and blood taken for some satanic ritual, and they're all being trafficked, God bless you, but it's not going to help one person here in our communities, not one. In fact, it's going to hurt them because now you're spreading that agenda. You can keep chasing it. People have. There's still no proof, but there's lots of those kinds of agendas that people are chasing, and they're not seeing what's happening here. That's why it keeps happening. So, Wendy, what does it look like, right? We want to hear some stories. Deacon Steve and I could go on and on, especially Deacon Steve. He's on the forefront. I'm more in the prevention arena, trying to stop it from even getting to the point where people on the front lines are dealing with this, pulling them out of the river, as we call it. I'm trying to keep them out of that river, right? But here's a few ways it looks. It looks like a girl from a nice church-going family. Lost her dad a little early in life, very traumatizing. Mom's an alcoholic. Met a guy, made her feel special, convinced her that they could take on the world. They just needed to make a little extra money now so that they could take on the world together later. And that slippery slope led to things that she couldn't get out of. It became violent. It looks like a drug addict who was exploited by a friend who offered to help her, but instead introduced her to a dangerous trafficker who promised to take care of her and supply her with her drugs, as long as she did a few things for him. But he would take care of her, and that turned violent. A college girl trying to pay off loans and tricked into thinking she's getting hired for a position of having dinner with men, just keeping them company. Right? Just keeping them company. She needed to pay off these loans, and she's going to make big money. She can do this in a few months. Only it doesn't just stop there. The expectations get higher, the threats start coming, and it gets ugly. It also looks like a teenage boy whose stepdad beat him while his mother stood by and said nothing. So he ran away, eventually connecting with a 50-year-old woman on social media who promised to take good care of him, give him a safe place to stay, meals, all the things that a teenage kid would need or want. But she wanted to take some pictures of him, and that slippery slope continued downward until he couldn't back out. And he ended up doing things he didn't really want to do. But he also did it out of loyalty to the woman who was taking care of him and promised to love him. She exploited his trust and vulnerability. It looks like a teenage girl in the foster system who only wants to be loved and made feel special. So she attaches herself to anybody who tells her that they're going to take care of her, that she's not like the rest of them, and that she's never going to have to deal with the life she used to have. It's going to be all better now. It's going to be awesome. It also looks like a teenage boy looking to make it big in the music industry in California. But once he got there, he really had no way to pay for a meal, no place to live, and living on the streets was getting very difficult. So people offered him some things, some options that motivated him to do things he never wanted to do, never intended to do, but had to do for survival. A 12-year-old girl in a chat group convinced to leave her safe, comfortable Florida home and meet up with a man 3 times her age that she met online in a chat group who just told her how different and special and unique she was, and he was going to show her the world, and convinced her to follow his directions and instructions, which got her all the way to Greece. All right, Greece. A 12-year-old girl who'd been gang raped, drugged, and photographed and told to do at a party told to do what she's told, or photos that were taken while she was drugged would be shared. It also looks like a girl sitting in her bedroom with her phone at night, safe and cozy, while you're sitting watching television or reading a book, meeting somebody online on Instagram who is, by the way, contacting her through a false profile, making it look like he was a teenage boy when really it was a middle-aged man, convincing her to private message him, and eventually, over time, convinced her to meet in person. And again, another slippery slope. And just a couple more. It also looks like an 8-year-old child whose drug-addicted mother needed rent money and money for food. And a teenage girl, new to the city, military family, traveled often, new high school, new friends all the time, looking to be accepted, had a crush on a guy. He invited her to his house, gave her a can of soda, drugged her, raped her, took pictures, and threatened her to do what he wanted her to do, or he was going to share those photos with her God-fearing family and church members. I mean, you guys, these guys are good. They are professionals. And the victim mindset, which I do have flyers for, by the way, to educate on that. The victim mindset is, the reason it's so hard to understand, I think, is the victim mindset is different than what our mindset is at that time. When you have a vulnerability being exploited, you're almost helpless. You're almost helpless to these professionals. So I'm going to ask a question, but you don't have to answer it. Answer it in your own head and be honest. So do any of these stories align with how you felt or thought human trafficking or sex trafficking specifically looked? And you don't have to say yes or no or anything, but just think about how easy it is for us to get our head. Maybe there was no picture of what it was. Maybe you're just like, I have no idea, you have a blank slate. So that would be the best scenario for me, for us, to start impressing on you the truth. But for those of us who have been raised with the media, social or mainstream, misconceptions, political agendas, it's hard to change that thinking. That's why I think these stories are so important. It's important to understand what is real and what is false. So, how can you help? Understand victim mindset. Learn about it. Support prevention education. This is my hot topic right now. For the last couple of years, I've been aggressively presenting on social media safety. This is, how much time do I have, Steve? This is now the #1 avenue and grooming platform for traffickers. Oh, okay, I'm okay. Social media is used in all elements of human trafficking now. The targeting, the grooming, the soliciting, the recruiting, the promoting, right? Selling, the controlling. Once they got them, they're going to control them. They can control. They know where they are. They have their apps set to locations. And then also on a good side, it also can be used to find resources and help. But social media is used in all aspects. I am a huge proponent of getting social media safety education into schools very, very young, as soon as they are expected to use computers and things for homework. So what is that, 3rd grade? I know kids are on it younger, but at the very least, that they're being handed these devices along with aggressive education for their age groups. All right, so that's something you can help, how you can help, because supporting that and educating them about what the dangers are. And I'm not saying taking them off of it, understand. I'm not saying that, because that would be an enormous task. I'm saying just give them the tools, just like we do when somebody gets their license or is about to get their license. When they're of age to start driving, we give them all the tools. We tell them about the dangers on the road. We teach them how to drive in snow. We teach them how to drive defensively. We need to teach kids how to be online defensively. That's it. Empower them, all right? So that's one way you can help. Build kids' self-confidence. Deacon Steve always talks about this typically in his presentations. Traffickers look for the least confident person. If it's whether it's social media comments, my life sucks, I'm ugly, my parents are horrible, life is done, it's hopeless. Or in person, in the mall, they're the one lagging behind, right? We need to teach more self-confidence with kids. Their self-confidence is being absolutely crushed on social media, if you had any idea what they are subjected to. Learn the red flags. I've got lists of them on that handout. There's red flags. We've got more we can talk about a little bit later. We'll get into that a little bit more. Learn how to respond and report. That's also on the handout I gave you. That has changed slightly. It used to always be that I would start rattling off the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Now, that is more targeted for victim services. Now, Department of Homeland Security wants you to directly contact their tip line, which is on the back of your sheet. What should I do next? So it's on one of the top lines, to report tips. I've watched videos and listened to podcasts. Every law enforcement professional or professional in this field says the same thing. If you think there might be something, just call, report it. Just report it. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Okay, they'd rather follow up on something that is nothing than miss something. So don't be afraid to report. And I'm almost done. Knowing how to respond. I go really deep into this in my social media education about not reacting if something happens, but responding. Don't freak out. I have been there and I have done it. It doesn't work. It shuts them down and turns them away. We need to, as a different generation, we need to understand that that generation's world and normal is different than ours. So we need to take a step back and take a breath before we respond to anything that is online or in person or any sort of situation where there may have been naked pictures sent, there may have been this happened, that things that just in our realm is just unbelievable and shocking. We have to kind of prepare yourself for the shock. So when something happens, you're not, oh my gosh, how could you? But rather, all right, hold on, we can get through this. Let's figure it out. Let's get some help. All right, that's the way to respond. And last but not least, well, actually, there's a couple more. Don't mind your own business, right? Don't mind your business. I can't stand it when I see that on social media. Just mind your own business. When I comment on things, which I don't do too often, but sometimes I just have to, those myths and misconceptions about human trafficking, I feel it's a responsibility as an advocate. I have to respond. And people like, mind your own business. Like, no, you cannot mind your own business. This is not an age and time to mind your own business. If you see something, you have to say something. And support organizations that do this important work, like the Franciscan Peacemakers. This is such an important organization. I can't put into words the amount of work they do to surround survivors and potential survivors, and even those who are offending. There's resources for them. So the whole scope of human trafficking, the Franciscan Peacemakers administers to and serves, and hosts these educational programs like you're doing. So what's happening here right now always just explodes my heart. Number one, this is a great turnout for these conversations. I've had plenty of conversations and presentations where there's 4 people or 6 people, and they're people I know pretty much, so they're sympathy attendance, in my opinion. Right, Janelle? So, I'm grateful for we are grateful for such a good turnout to hear such an important topic. Human trafficking is a very complicated topic, you guys, many moving parts. You can't say this is what it is. That's why you have to, when you listen to a presentation like this, you have to now go out and continue that education, right? Survivor stories, sex trafficking survivor stories in Wisconsin. You can Google search. Your heart will absolutely break wide open. But then you will feel like, oh, okay, now I know now, right? And you will feel empowered, and that's the whole point. This is not hopeless. Every single person matters, and we won't stop until we won't. Like, I will keep talking about this, I imagine, until I just can't talk anymore about it. And because it's that important, every single person is that important to try and help. So, Deacon Steve, can I make the comment about? It's not a secret, but I don't know. So Deacon Steve is going to be retiring after 29 years with the Franciscan Peacemakers, specifically, right? And yeah, my heart, yes, yeah. Yeah, and so, Shinichi, I know, right? We're together, I know. But also on the same sense, I'm grateful for his decision, or happy for him for his decision to, get on with the next chapter of his life and his own healing. The secondary trauma is enormous, as anybody working on the front line knows. And he's going to be passing that baton on to somebody else. But you guys, this is such a special gift to hear Deacon Steve speak. Besides the fact he's just one of those people that is just wonderful to listen to. He's truly a foremost authority on this topic. I mean, I don't know. He's like the most undecorated hero, in my opinion. Although you do have quite a few awards behind you with different things, including the FBI this past year was an exciting one. But honestly, just so much information, and I've been so grateful to be tutoring, so to speak, underneath him and able to learn from him, because I can't imagine anyone who I could learn so much from and be guided by. So and as a friend. So without further ado, please welcome Deacon Steve Shedpelski with the Franciscan Peacemakers, one of your last presentations with me.
Good morning, everyone. How many of you were here at 11 o'clock, 9:30 Mass? Anybody came back from 7 o'clock? Oh, thank you. I made a bad impression. So Wendy gave examples of how, and she was talking younger people in most cases, how they get trapped as a victim of sex trafficking. And those are just a handful of examples. How many of you paid attention to Father Jude's homily today? Raise your hand. Right, who wants to give me it? No. So, his focus was really on healing and not necessarily the miracle story. Okay? And so one of the things that I've learned over the years is the women that Franciscan Peacemakers has ministered to for nearly 29 years is our own brokenness is not any different. That everyone in this room needs healing. Maybe spiritual healing, mental health healing, physical healing, combination of all three. And once I understood that after about 4, 5, 6 years, I could approach ministering to the women in a more relaxed environment. My background prior to ministry was manufacturing management. You hit a hunk of metal, it turns into something. Well, you're not going to hit a victim and say, be the person you were created to be. It's learning how to walk the journey. I've done over 1,000 assessments in 29 years. And I gave the statistic at the 7 o'clock Mass. Do you remember the statistic I gave you? What percentage of victims from this county? 20. You were awake. Okay, 20% of the victims, 20% of the women I assessed came from Washington County. My wife and I are married 47 years. We lived in West Bend for 46 of those 47 years. I didn't realize how much damage was being done. It runs a parallel track to domestic violence. It runs a parallel track to drug use. It runs a parallel track to kids, boys and girls, being sexually abused as children. And that is the common denominator of over 1,000 women that I assessed. Regardless, woman coming out of poverty, a woman of color, woman from middle class, woman from wealth. I have ministered to social workers who have been trafficked, teachers, daughter of a judge, college athletes, and a whole lot in between. And it's this longing for love. We all, as part of our humanity, we long to be loved. And I think we have, at least I know in my life, I've had a misunderstanding why Jesus was sent among us. It wasn't to teach us an evacuation plan to heaven. It was about Jesus telling us how much our Creator loves us and to teach us to love one another because God created all of humanity. And so when you have parents or step-parents or partners, grandparents who are physically, emotionally, and sexually abusing children, how is that person going to grow up and understand what love really is? How many in this room can raise their hand and say, after I'm 67 and some months, can say, I truly understand what love is? We can't, because that longing is always there in us. And it's not just about wanting to be loved. It is about wanting to give love. Okay? Wanting to be loved and wanting to give love. And so when traffickers, who I refer to as amateur psychologists, and they understand and they look for the vulnerabilities, and I can speak about women because that's the population I've worked with, but it's true of adult women. It's true of adult men, and I will get to that, how I interact with adult men dealing with sexual abuse and children. They know they want to be hugged and loved, and are willing to do anything. And so when this guy is spotting this group of college students walking at Mayfair Mall, and I know this to be factual, and he identifies the one who was walking a couple steps behind a group of 5 or 6 or 7 as the vulnerable one, because she's not really participating in the conversation. She's kind of looking down or looking away and just kind of smiles and everyone's laughing. And he knows that's his mark. Excuse me. And, he strikes up a conversation, they exchange phone numbers, and he, they begin dating, and she's just over the moon. And once he's confident that he has her to a point that he can really manipulate her, then he begins to put her in situations to do things that she does not want to do. Okay? And I should have prefaced this by saying, this is not the only way that a woman, man, or child gets sucked into trafficking. But it is a very common way. It's known in agencies and law enforcement as the Romeo way. And the Romeo is getting to know the woman's family, because that's important to use as leverage later on. Because the trafficker knows that 99% of the women are not going to cooperate, because they do have a sense of self-worth and dignity, which he's trying, that little bit, which he's trying to totally take away. And when he says, hey, I've been taking care of you, been buying you nice things, I've been doing this, doing that, and I lost my job and I need some help. Can you help me? And at first, she's willing to go, yes, I love you very much. And then he begins to put her in these positions, and she refuses. And this Romeo pimp trafficker becomes, in another language, what we call guerrilla traffickers and pimps. He will hit her. And so many times the women will still resist and try to get away. And because he got to know her parents or her friends, he says, if you don't do this, and he puts up his cell phone, and she recognizes an acquaintance of his who's standing outside her mother's house and says, if you don't do this, I will kill your mom. And I've heard that story repeatedly from adult women anywhere from the age of 18 to 40. But it wasn't until a 15-year-old girl who had at one time heard me give a talk like this to high school students up in Sheboygan County, who made the mistake of running away from home. She had a fight with her mom. And she told me the same story of this guy, identified her vulnerability right away as a runaway and says, oh, you can live with me and have all the freedom you want. You just got to help around the house. And, he kept getting information from her about her family, where they lived, and all this kind of stuff. And he puts the phone up to her after he puts her in this position, and she's refusing, and she's kicking, and she's hitting him, and she's being beaten. And she said, when he told me he was going to kill my mom, what choice did I have? And she's the only one that used these words. I love my mom. Okay? And I suspect that was true for many other victims. They just didn't articulate those words. And the lesson she taught me, I've heard the gospel, I've read the gospel and preached on the gospel, John's gospel, and he laid down his life for his friend. How many of you ever heard that gospel reading? Raise your hand. Not sure, because the hand only went up to. How many of you heard that? Okay, very good. I just want to make sure everybody's awake. And when I have heard that reading and proclaimed that gospel and preached on that reading, I always got caught up, and I suspect many of us do, that we hear about sweet Jesus. Isn't Jesus nice? Look what Jesus did for us. And it's a wonderful, powerful thing. And yet this 15-year-old girl heard that lesson and did what Jesus did and laid down her life to protect another. And that's love. And this young woman today is an ER nurse. And she encounters victims. And she's still angry, and rightfully so, after all these years, and wants to walk away And she doesn't because she's learned to move and give her love beyond the one she immediately knows. And after all these years, she's still in therapy. But she's healing and she's a healer. Now, those of you at 9:30, I said, I would tell you some miracle stories because Father Jude was talking about miracles at Lourdes, right? Is that a miracle story? You don't sound confident.
Yes, Deacon Steve.
If you stop and think about it, really is, and it's a powerful story. And as she told the investigators that the only reason she is surviving, and this is a couple years after, is because she's recognizing people who she never knew cared about her, loved her. And unfortunately, it took all this for her and her mom to mend all those fences. And it wasn't easy. Wendy and I both know another victim out of Ozaukee County, straight A student, head cheerleader. Yes. Coming from wealth. Her uncle and her cousin were trafficking her. Her uncle was a retired Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputy who knew she would go and report him, and he had the foresight to talk to all of his connections across Ozaukee County and Washington County, Milwaukee County, that if my niece comes here, she's just crazy. And they did not listen to her. Nor did her mother notice that this young woman went from being a straight A student, totally involved student in all kinds of activities, including cheerleading, and began going downhill. It's paying attention as a parent, as a teacher, as a healthcare provider, as somebody involved in youth ministry in the parish, as pastor, wherever, is why the decline. And there's a lot of kids that decline in high school, and it's not because they're being trafficked. But something's happening to them. And we have to keep our eyes open. And that's a challenge for us more today than ever. I have 3 grandchildren. One's 2.5. She is going to be a diva. The other 2 are boys. And thank God. Yet, the 9-year-old is already feeling the pressures. He wants to have a cell phone because everybody has one. And his parents are old-fashioned. And he's telling stories without realizing that he's telling what's happening and what his friends are exposed to at 9 and 10 years old. And so Wendy rightfully tells the stories about traffickers and people in power. And they can be business people, they can be politicians, they can be whoever. This retired county sheriff's deputy made everybody look the other way. And kids, and it's not only kids, it's a lot of adults who are drowning in this. It was social media that a lot of these professional women feeling a little self-esteem. Successful women. But they're reading about what their friends are posting. Oh, I'm in this wonderful 15-year marriage. Oh, look at, and they're feeling like nobody wants me. I'm worthless. All I am is my job and, whatever. And they're just like a 15-year-old at 35 and 40, they're writing on whatever social media platform. They're telling their hurt stories without realizing it. And we are overwhelmed in southeastern Wisconsin. We are overwhelmed in the state of Wisconsin. We are overwhelmed in this country. We are overwhelmed in this world with men who want to rent the body of a man, woman, or child for sex. Okay? And over the years, and it took me a lot of years to have the courage to include in presentations or in preaching to talk about the problems with pornography. And in studies, and I never dreamed in my life I'm going to be reading studies from Pew Research that talk about men who worship 3 times a month, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, view pornography at least once a week. It's like 80%. Of that group, it's like cut in half. And about 40% view it routinely. And of that group, 20% begin to formulate plans to go rent the body of a woman, man, or child for sex. And of that group, 5% act on it. Now, acting on it doesn't mean they actually paid the money and had sex with the person. But they were this close. Okay? And as I read these studies, so when and I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but when I read these studies, and you think the number of men who worship in this country 3 times a month, we are talking tens of millions. Okay? When I'm assessing a survivor and she's willing, it's generally much farther down the line after an assessment, to tell her story, what happened to her. And a woman up at, I can't remember the parish name now, in Beaver Dam, where I preached in 2019, and I would tell the story of survivors saying they were forced to have sex 10 to 12 times a day, 7 days a week. And this woman says to me after Mass, and she's in her late 40s at the time, and says, I listened to you. She said, I've been in therapy for years, and part of me is dying inside, and the other part is cheering inside because you're telling my story. She said, you only got one thing wrong. She said, I didn't have sex 7, 8, 10 times a day. She said, I was raped 7, 8, 10 times a day. And so in the world of Franciscan peacemakers and other organizations that serve victim and survivors, it is, how do we help people deal with the trauma, sexual abuse as a child, the rape while they're being trafficked, the violence they experience by being trafficked. We have a system that deals with addiction. And I'm not saying this critically, I'm saying we don't know enough, or we're not willing yet to do more, that says to a person dealing with alcoholism or addiction, we're going to give you 90 days of treatment to get your life together. That's what it was when we started Peacemakers 29 years ago. 90 days to get your life together. So you learn how to be sober, you get your GED, you get a job, you get reconnected with your children. how many people are going to succeed? And I'm going to ask you to think in your own families and extended families. And just keep it in your head and heart. Those of you who have dealt with alcoholism and drug addiction, and a number of times the families went through to work with this family member. And sometimes the only thing we can do is leave that person because it's destroying us as well. That's trafficking victims on steroids. I've been able and privileged to do this work for 29 years because of great spiritual direction and great therapy. And, you know, the 15-year-old girl I referred to earlier, again, just continues to be my greatest teacher. You know, and she talks about coming to a place in her life that as a broken woman, she had in her head she could only help once she was fully healed. And as I've talked to men who've had the same experience, who've heard me preach or heard me talking about the role of pornography, their experiences, and I'm talking a much smaller group, 1,000 women, about 100 men, their experiences are no different than the women. The victimization and being a male and, you know, you're forced to keep everything in. And I deal with men as young in their 20s to men in their 70s. And as they share their stories, they cry like little boys. It's that yearning, wanting to be loved, wanting to be able to love. And until we, and it's a big we, locally, can stop being in denial. First, and again, beyond trafficking. First, what goes on in our immediate extended family, you know, the hurts that addiction brings, the hurts that social media brings. And again, Wendy, a lot of her examples, she's talking about young people. And I know in my experience, I'm talking about adults. You know, the same thing. They never matured as they're seeking healing and they're seeking love. My last miracle story. So for a number of years, when Franciscan Peacemakers was strictly a street ministry on the streets of Milwaukee and at truck stops in surrounding counties, including whatever it used to be before Quick Trip over on Holy Hill Road in 41, and ministering to these women. And there was a woman on the streets that we ministered to. She says it's 10 years. I say it's 11 years. I call it 10 and a half. And there's no way I would have believed that today, Cynthia is in her final year at Mount Mary University studying to be a social worker. That Cynthia graduated our program where she could come in, live in our Clare community named in honor of St. Clare of Assisi. That Cynthia rides in the van doing street outreach. That Cynthia stands as a symbol in our hospitality center over on 34th and Lisbon, which is one of the most highly prostituted neighborhoods in the city and one of the most highly sex trafficked zip codes in the Midwest. And women go, oh my gosh, Cynthia, you did this. And I watch her and her other outreach worker, and I'm going to introduce Shinichi real fast, also a graduate of our Clare Community Program, who's our production manager for our social enterprise, because we provide employment to the women. They make all that stuff. You know, and so Shinichi's doing more than teaching them. She's this presence of what your life can look like. And so she does her production stuff. She comes and does sales. But I had to call her about something yesterday, and she said, I'm getting ready to take one of the women to a meeting. That's love. It's giving love. Helping another person heal. And when we stop believing, whether it be the miracles at Lourdes or the miracles of Franciscan peacemakers, then we've made the decision there is not a loving God. And for 29 years, and I'm not going to say I have not had my moments of going, is there a God? Way too many times that was the only thing that kept me going. Way too many times it's our board of directors. Way too many times it's my colleagues. But most of the time, when we thought we're going to pull the plug, this is not worth it, it's the woman on the street saying, I'm so glad you came. I've been praying to God all night that you'd come. I had to understand that miracles aren't only the success stories of Cynthia or the 15-year-old girl who's now an ER nurse, but also in those moments. Because it takes courage. And again, I'm going to ask you to just reflect on your own immediate and extended family experience. It takes courage for that person to enter into recovery one more time. And it takes courage for the people that love that person to love one more time. It takes courage to love. But most importantly, it takes faith in God. And to hear that gospel message differently, it's not just sweet Jesus who laid down his life for his friends, but every one of us in this room right now has that standing invitation. Whatever it is, to be open to what's going about you, not to let the chaos of life overwhelm you so much that you don't want to see anymore, especially if it's in your family. That's what happened to the cheerleader and a straight A student in Ozaukee County. Mom did not want to see the chaos. I thank you so much, and I think we have like 6 minutes for questions. Is that right? 15? Oh, I could have kept on talking. No. Yes.
And one is of a guy and a young girl in an elevator. And someone's going into the elevator, and the girl is giving a signal. Help me. So what's that signal?
I'm going to refer you to our social media guru here.
Well, so I've heard that too, Ken, and I don't. There's also been different things like if a girl is at the bar and there's something, some guy she feels threatened, that there's a certain drink she's supposed to drink. There's different campaigns that have been out there within different organizations for stuff like that. The problem with that, so I'm not going to say it's not true at all. Like, it could very well be true, but the problem is it's not universal. Like, you know what I mean? It's not, that is not something that is supported or promoted amongst the organizations, the authority organizations like National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or the Department of Homeland Security, or any of those types of organizations. So it only works if somebody knows what the heck it is. So does that?
And there's a lot of bars that do a lot of different things, that they have notices in their bar. If you feel like you're in trouble, order a ginger ale or something like that. And it's effective in that bar. So like Wendy said, there's not a universal method of operation. But it's an indication of people wanting to make a difference.
Yeah, I have more seniors. I never see them.
Oh, he said he fed Martin Senior Center. He doesn't see anything that we're talking about. He's a comedian. Yeah.
Victims that are not actually victims. The victim that is something going on, but he's saying things so they didn't happen.
Oh, okay. I just realized I'm not a camera range. And I'm back. So the question is, what about a victim who, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to understand it, who saw something and didn't get involved, and you had one more part to that.
And the guilt that they feel.
And the guilt that that person feels.
Is there anything that they can do to overcome that?
So, and I've run into that. And it's mostly been moms not seeing that in their daughters or sons. And family therapy really is, a good start. This woman from Ozaukee County, she had begged Wendy and I to let her talk at an event. And her mom came. And this was the first time her mom really heard the whole story. And neither one of us have had much contact with that victim since. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. And you could just see the crushed look on the mom. And I did talk to the mom. I gave her my card. She did not give me any information I could reach out to. That's a real thing, though.
Well, just an example, I'm in an area and somebody is saying that, in the elevator. I mean, how do I respond to that? If I'm not in the elevator, to wait for them to come out and then it's stuck for them, but
And I'm going to tell you how I do. And I'm not recommending what I do to anybody. Okay? I'm not even recommending it to me at my age. And, that plays a role. So, different example is again at malls. And another one of our board members who's involved in prevention of sex trafficking in Waukesha County saw the behavior at Mayfair Mall. And she, no, it was Brookfield Square. And she had her wits about her because in part, she's well educated in what she's seen. And she got a hold of the security guard right away, and they put something in place immediately, but she was gone. Okay? But, they have video cameras and all this kind of stuff. And so when you can really provide a security person, law enforcement, as much information as you can, okay, that has the potential to help in a conviction. And one of the things that Wendy did bring up, that these law enforcement people are saying, make the call. There's this thing in Milwaukee that's called the Fusion Center for Law Enforcement, and it's bigger than this, and it's full of computers, and people who law enforcement folks, federal, state, local level, who work on, I'm going to say specialty crimes, but that's not the way I want to describe it. they're constantly getting data fed into this fusion center. And one of the way a number of convictions of traffickers have happened is because somebody was able to give a cell phone number of a potential victim. And then they add that cell phone number into a whole bank of cell phone numbers. And it starts going back to one or two individuals. And that was enough data to get convictions. One of the things that Wendy said, we don't hear a lot about human trafficking convictions. And there have been a number. Every county in the state of Wisconsin has had convictions. So many times it's easier to get convictions on other things, and the victim doesn't necessarily have to testify. So it's not going to be counted as a trafficking conviction, but there is a conviction nonetheless. They will do whatever they can to get the perpetrator off the streets. Way in the back.
So did everybody hear that question? Just wondering what is it? What's the environment like with our school systems in Washington County regarding this topic about getting prevention education? And by prevention education, specifically what I'm talking, now there's different things. There's human trafficking prevention education that there's a member on our board of directors of Peacemakers who that's her realm that she's really pushing. And there are things that are happening in Milwaukee County specifically. But my experience, I have spoken with our Hartford High School Board of Directors. I've had conversations with the principal. I've had conversations with other school administrators or leaders, church leaders, school leaders. I'm always pushing it. I'm always talking about it. I'm not going to say anybody's against it. I think it's the logistics of it all that is making it complicated. They want to know very much exactly how this is going to look in their school. Like, what is the presentation going to look like based on the fact that our parents going to be, revolting or whatever? Is there going to be an issue in that respect? So what our organization, the Washington County Anti-Trafficking Advocates, focuses on in 2024, we were granted a significant amount of money and by a couple different, some private personal people and also other organizations. And we are planning to put together, I've already talked to the sheriff about this, a video, an educational video that is going to use the resources that are already available, educating about social media safety, the grooming techniques, identifying those patterns, what to do, how to report. And then we're going to try and engage all the local law enforcement agencies in Washington County to make it a little more, get some skin in the game. And once we get that video put together, then we can send that link out to our school system and say, this is the presentation. You can do it on your own. You can invite me, law enforcement, who if it's Jackson, maybe Jackson PD can do it. If it's Hartford, someone from Hartford PD, whatever. Or it can just be done on their own, but at least they can preview it ahead of time, because I really think that's kind of the hang up. Also, I mean, schools have these huge, agendas. I mean, I don't mean that in like an agenda, but there's a lot that they're trying to fit into their school day. I get that. I respect that. Also, one other thing I want to add to that, I think one of the barriers is that I have learned, a lot of the administration, they don't understand it's happening. School board members don't understand it's happening. And I'm only one person who's out here trying to beat the drum and kick some doors down. And I've also got a lot going on in my other part of my life. So it's also a time thing. Like, I think if I had nothing to do but just aggressively try to make connections with these schools, I think I could get this in there. But it's just a process. And that's why I always ask at these presentations, if you have somebody on the school, if you're on the school board, or if you have any connections and you talk to somebody and you say, hey, can we at least have a conversation with Wendy and see what this is going to look like? I'm always up for that conversation with somebody from the school system. I can present to a board of directors. I can give you the general outline of what this presentation would look like. But our goal is to have it all in a video so it can be done and I can present alongside of it so that it is very clear what is going to be in that video or what is going to be in that presentation. I also think a lot of them don't understand that this is such an important topic, that this is actually happening. I think it's a hugely I think parents and school administration, and I'm not just guessing, this is in my conversations and my experience, they don't see the culture that these kids are living in firsthand. They do not understand how this is affecting their mental health and how the weight, they are not understanding the enormous weight of shame and fear and secrets that these kids are carrying on their shoulders from a very young age. And that's where my heart is like, Jason my husband is with big brothers and big sisters. He was taking his little brother home one day from doing something, and he was driving down our streets of Hartford. He was in 7th grade, I think, at that time. And he saw a girl walking down the street, and he said, "Oh, there's a girl from my class. She's famous in our school." And, "Oh, yeah, Jason says, what's she famous for?" "Oh, she sent her boyfriend a naked picture, and then they broke up, and now he's charging his friends $20 to send it to him." All right, 7th grade. Right? Now, do you think that girl told her parents? Because guess what? She wasn't supposed to send that picture, right? She's probably going to get in trouble, going to get her phone taken away because a parent probably doesn't have the forthright in their head, because if you're not educated, you're going to react like what? "Oh my God, what were you thinking?" I've done it, like I said, I've done it. Instead, responding, taking a step back, right? It's a two-pronged thing. The kids need to be educated in school, but the parents need to be educated so that they can work together. Like, yes, something could happen. Here's how to avoid it. But if your foot gets in the trap, I am here for you, and I'm going to walk through this with you. Right? Those two parts are so important, and I don't think and school administrators understand the weight that is being carried by a lot of these kids. I hope that I over-answered your question. Yes? Yeah. 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 It's got to be started younger. Oh, go ahead. What? Go ahead. I agree.
So I can attest to Wendy trying a lot. I know our organization has tried a lot. I know many organizations tried a lot. And with the emphasis on church, I hate to say this, Catholic parents are the worst in wanting their kids exposed because, and at the grade level you're talking about, okay? Because they think if they hear the word sex, well, that's automatically going to make all their 6th, 7th, 8th graders want to have sex. I mean, I'm generalizing, but we've heard that so many times. We know from experience, I know from experience, that kids are getting exposed on social media, on their cell phones, on their friends' cell phones, as young as 3rd grade, 4th grade. And so there have been parishes that we've been at over the years who have been brave enough, who have given parents the option not to have their kids in there, and 99% of the time, 99% of the kids are there. The bigger problem is we also want parents there, and parents don't show up. So there has to be, coming from within the parish setting, the parish school setting, the parish religious education setting.
I'm doing a presentation. I'm already scheduled. I'm scheduled for Good Shepherd of the Hills is having me do a presentation And then 2 follow-ups in April with their religious ed classes and focusing on this, exactly what we're talking about, the starting early with our prevention education. And then Christ the King is having me come in and do a presentation for their parents and religious ed kids. I mean, it's happened. Last year, towards the end of, like I would say in October, one of my last presentations, Slinger Middle School had me speak. And like normal, I expected about a dozen people. I think there was over 130 people or something like that. I was shocked. And it was parents and kids. But there was a teacher there who was hell-bent on getting her kids, getting kids and getting parents there. And she reached out to all of her resources and her networking people and her teachers and administrators. Like, that's what it takes. I can't do it. I don't speak the teacher language, the administration language, right? We need, like, here's the information. Hey, can you help get this into the schools, into the churches, and start talking about it and understanding why it's so important to have that prevention education in. Oh, I want to add one more thing. Regarding the question about the signal in the elevator, and then, well, Ken at the bar in the senior center. But in all seriousness, you know what, you guys, you can sometimes do everything right. Learn it all, learn all the signs, watch videos, get educated, come to presentations like this. See something that doesn't seem right, report to the number that I gave you that's on your sheet, and it can still produce nothing. Because if somebody doesn't want to be helped, and Deacon Steve can speak on that much more eloquently than I, it's just, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you don't try and report, because as Deacon Steve said, it's those connections of dots. Maybe she's not ready now, but maybe down the road, and it might connect with another case.
Yes.
How do you start a conversation with somebody who just thinks trafficking doesn't work, isn't existing? Yeah. I know, that's a great question. It's all make-believe, yeah. Yeah, that's not unusual. How do you start the conversation? I start it, and this is what I do. I get that mostly, I see that on social media more than I have in person, because anybody who knows me kind of knows now. Don't say that to Wendy. I'll be there for an hour and a half. But I'll never get home. But 2 parts. One part, if it's on social media, I don't even comment anymore. I drop links of resources. So I'll find like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or the different authorities, the resources that are there, governmental agencies, non-governmental agencies. I'll drop those links with that education in there. And you can't force somebody to believe something either way. So I've learned this, because I would sometimes get so mad. But it's like anything. I mean, you hope that if they hear it and see it enough, that it might change them in their thinking. So how do you say something to somebody in person? Well, you can also share resources. Take that sheet that I gave you, and I have others up here. There's websites on there. Encourage them to research that. Also, what you can do is you can encourage them. Most people have access to a computer and can search something online. This is what I did when I first learned. I grew up in Milwaukee. I had multiracial friends of all sorts. We slept overnight at each other's houses. I was deep in Milwaukee, the inner city sometimes, and they were at we were all a mixture of people and friends, and I never thought anything of it. But when I think back to it now, I may have missed some important science, because once I learned about the topic, and that was because of Deacon Steve, I didn't quite understand. I was probably like most people are still. I still didn't quite understand it. And I Google searched, I sat down at my computer and I searched sex trafficking in Milwaukee. And I went, and Jason can attest to this, I went into about a week's worth of darkness, into this vortex of darkness. I couldn't believe what I didn't know. Growing up in Milwaukee with friends who were probably very vulnerable to this. And I would have never seen the signs. I didn't know this was happening. So I suggest you can't believe the amount of information that is online. When people want to find a direction, they sure know how to use the computer, or they want to know a restaurant, what their hours are. Same thing with this. Encourage them to search it online. You can give them my phone number, and I can have a conversation with them. I'm happy. It's on my business cards, or Washington County anti-trafficking cards. So I don't know if that helps, but I always say the resources are a great tool, rather than trying to explain it on your own. Oh. Are they on their way up?
But I want to thank everyone so much for coming, especially those who were at 7 o'clock mass this morning. They should stand and take a bow.